Hello everyone, and a warm welcome to today's session. I'm excited to introduce you to our presentation on BPCC-101, Introduction to Psychology. Today we'll be focusing on Unit 7, which is all about memory. This course is part of the Bachelor of Arts Huns in Psychology program. My name is your name, and I'm glad you're here. Throughout this presentation, we'll explore the fascinating processes behind how we remember, forget, and recall information. So, let's get started and dive into the intriguing world of memory. Let's begin by understanding what memory actually is. Memory is the psychological process that enables us to retain, store, and recall information over time. It's a vital part of how we function daily, helping us learn new things, make decisions, and even shape our sense of identity. When we think of memory, it's often called the storehouse of experience, because it allows us to use what we've learned in the past to guide our present actions. Psychologists study memory to understand how we encode, which is how we initially take in information, how we store it for future use, and how we retrieve it when needed. They also look into why sometimes we forget things, which is a normal part of the process. In this unit, we will explore the nature of memory, its different types and models, and what causes us to forget. We'll also discuss strategies to improve memory, making learning and everyday living more effective. All these concepts are interconnected and essential for understanding how we experience and adapt to the world around us. Let's dive into the objectives of this unit on memory. First, we'll explore what memory truly is, the concept, its nature, and the processes involved in how we encode, store, and retrieve information. Understanding these fundamentals is key to grasping the complexities of memory. Next, we'll look at the different types of memory. We'll differentiate between declarative memory, which involves facts and events we can consciously recall, non-declarative memory, which includes skills and habits that operate unconsciously, and sensory memory, the brief retention of sensory information immediately after an experience. We'll also evaluate various models of memory, such as the traditional multi-store model, the levels of processing model, and the working memory model. These frameworks help us understand how memory functions and how information is processed and maintained in our minds. Another important area we'll cover is theories of forgetting. We'll discuss why we forget, including concepts like interference, where similar memories compete, and trace decay, which involves the fatting of memories over time. Additionally, we'll explore mnemonic strategies to enhance memory. Techniques like imagery and organizational methods can significantly improve our ability to remember and recall information more effectively. Finally, we'll see how memory applies to everyday life. We'll discuss autobiographical memories, which shape our personal identity, false memories, which can sometimes lead us astray, and flashbulb memories, those vivid, detailed recollections of significant events. Throughout this unit, our goal is to build a comprehensive understanding of memory, not just as a mental process, but as a vital part of our daily lives. Let's start by understanding the nature and scope of memory. Memory, in simple terms, is the process by which we encode, store, and retrieve information and experiences from the past. It acts as a bridge connecting what we know from the past to how we behave today. This connection influences our learning, our thinking, and even our sense of identity. It's important to recognize that memory isn't just a passive recording device. Instead, it's an active and constructive process. Our mind doesn't just record experiences like a tape recorder. It actively selects, organizes, and reconstructs these experiences to make sense of them. This means that our memories can be shaped and reshaped over time, depending on how we process and interpret our experiences. Without memory, learning would be impossible, and our personal continuity, the sense of being the same person over time, would be lost. Memory is truly fundamental to who we are and how we function. Now, let's look at how this process works through its different stages. Memory operates through 3 interdependent stages: encoding, storage, and retrieval. The first stage is encoding. This is where sensory input, what we see, hear, or sense, gets transformed into a form that our mind can process. For example, when you meet someone and remember their name, your brain links that name to their appearance or the meaning behind it. That's encoding in action. Next is storage, which involves maintaining that information over time. Depending on the importance or frequency of use, information can be stored either temporarily in short-term memory or more permanently in long-term memory. Repetition, rehearsal, and attaching meaning to information all help strengthen this storage process. Finally, we have retrieval, the process of bringing that stored information back into our conscious awareness when we need it. The ease of retrieval often depends on the strength of the memory itself and the cues we have to trigger it. Together, these stages form a dynamic cycle that allows us to learn from our past experiences and use that knowledge effectively in the present. Today, we're going to explore the scope and significance of memory and how it plays a crucial role in our lives. First, in the realm of education, memory is vital because it enables us to learn new information, retain it over time, and recall it when needed. This is why effective teaching methods often involve techniques like association, repetition, and fostering understanding. These strategies help strengthen our memory and make learning more effective. Moving on to personal and social life, memory guides our behavior and decision-making based on past experiences. It helps us form habits, develop attitudes, and maintain emotional stability by learning from what we've previously encountered. In the professional and cognitive domains, memory forms the foundation for developing skills, solving problems, and gaining expertise. Through practice, we can convert effortful tasks into automatic responses, which allows us to perform efficiently without overthinking every step. In clinical and applied fields, understanding how memory works is essential for treating conditions like amnesia, dementia, and stress-related disorders. Therapies and cognitive training often focus on improving memory functions to help individuals regain or enhance their daily functioning. Now, let's look at the relationship between memory and learning. They are deeply interconnected. Learning involves acquiring new knowledge, while memory ensures we retain and use that knowledge over time. Essentially, memory creates a continuity for our learning process, and learning, in turn, enriches our memory by forming new associations. Together, they underpin our intelligence, reasoning, and ability to adapt to new situations. This interconnectedness reminds us that memory and learning are at the heart of how we grow and function as individuals. Let's take a closer look at the types of memory and get an overview of how they work together. Human memory isn't just one single system. Instead, it's made up of a network of specialized subsystems, each designed to handle different kinds of information. This means that different types of memory serve different functions, from fleeting sensory impressions to the long-term storage of our experiences and skills. Psychologists generally classify memory into three main types: declarative or explicit memory, non-declarative or implicit memory, and sensory memory. Each of these plays a crucial role in how we receive, keep, and retrieve information. These systems work in harmony to help us learn, adapt, and function effectively. They ensure that the right information is available at the right time, whether we're recalling facts, skills, or sensory experiences. Understanding these different types of memory is essential because it highlights how complex and interconnected our memory processes truly are, supporting our overall theme of how memory underpins our ability to learn and adapt. Now, let's take a closer look at the types of memory, starting with declarative or explicit memory. This type of memory involves our conscious effort to recall facts, events, and experiences. When I say conscious, I mean we're intentionally trying to remember something, and it's something we can often put into words or describe clearly. That's why it's called explicit memory. To form and keep this kind of memory, we need to pay attention, be aware of what we're trying to remember, and rehearse it. Repetition really helps. This type of memory is crucial for many aspects of our lives, especially in learning, reasoning, and solving problems. Now, within declarative memory, we have some important subtypes. The first is semantic memory, which is our memory for facts and general knowledge about the world. For example, knowing that the Earth orbits the Sun or that water boils at 100 degrees Celsius All of these are facts stored in our semantic memory. Semantic memory is organized conceptually, meaning it helps us understand language, logic, and comprehension. It's the foundation of much of our educational and everyday knowledge. The second subtype is episodic memory. This involves the memory of our personal experiences, things that happen to us personally, tied to specific times and places. For instance, remembering your graduation day or a family vacation, that's episodic memory. It gives us a sense of continuity in our lives and helps shape our personal identity. It's what makes our memories unique and personal. Finally, there's working memory. Think of this as your mental workspace. It's a short-term system that temporarily holds and manipulates information. For example, when you remember a phone number just long enough to dial it, that's working memory in action. It's essential for reasoning, calculations, and decision-making, because it allows us to work with information actively in our minds. So, in summary, these different types of declarative memory, semantic, episodic, and working, each play vital roles in how we learn, remember, and function daily. Now, let's take a closer look at the types of memory, starting with non-declarative, or what we also call implicit memory. This type of memory operates quite unconsciously, meaning we're not intentionally trying to recall information or even aware that we're doing it. It's responsible for many automatic skills, conditioned responses, and habits that we've developed over time. One key point here is that implicit memory tends to be more resistant to decay and less affected by aging or amnesia, which makes it quite resilient. Within non-declarative memory, there are several important components. The first is procedural memory, which stores our motor skills and habitual actions. Think about activities like cycling, typing, or driving. Once we've learned these skills, they become automatic, allowing us to perform them efficiently without conscious effort. Next is priming, where prior exposure to a stimulus influences our response later on, without us even realizing it. For example, if I show you the word yellow, you're more likely to recognize the word banana afterward, simply because of that earlier exposure. Then we have classical conditioning, which involves learned associations between stimuli and responses. A common example is feeling anxious when you visit the dentist's office because of past painful experiences there. Overall, implicit memory highlights how our learning adapts to everyday life, enabling us to respond quickly and habitually, saving us time and mental effort. It's a fascinating part of how our brain works behind the scenes to support our daily functioning. Let's start by talking about sensory memory, which is the very first stage of memory. This is the stage where our brain briefly holds sensory information from our environment. Think of it as a kind of buffer system that catches impressions from our senses just long enough for us to decide whether we want to pay attention to them or not. Now, there are different types of sensory memory, each tied to a specific sense. The first is iconic memory, which relates to visual information. This type of memory retains what we see for less than a second, so it's very fleeting. For example, if you see a flash of lightning or a quick scene and then close your eyes, you might still briefly see that image in your mind. Next is echoic memory, which is related to sound. It holds auditory information for about 2 to 4 seconds. So, even if you weren't fully paying attention, you might still be able to recall the last few words someone said just moments ago. Then there's haptic memory, which deals with touch. It stores tactile sensations like the texture, temperature, or pressure we feel. A key piece of research that helps us understand sensory memory better was conducted by George Sperling in 1960. He showed that humans can hold a surprisingly large amount of sensory information for just a brief moment before it fades away. Understanding sensory memory is crucial because it forms the foundation for how we process and transfer information into our short-term and long-term memories. Let's take a closer look at the interaction among different types of memory. Sensory memory is the first point of contact. It captures incoming stimuli from our environment. When we pay attention to this information, it moves into our short-term or working memory. From there, with rehearsal or by attaching meaning to it, the information can transfer into long-term memory. This long-term storage can be either declarative, which involves facts and experiences, or non-declarative, which covers skills and habits. What's important to understand is that these systems aren't isolated, they're interconnected. For example, watching someone cook is sensory input. When you try it yourself, that's working memory in action. And eventually, mastering the recipe becomes a procedural long-term memory. To sum up, memory isn't just one single process. Instead, it involves multiple systems that work together, each differing in how aware we are of them, how long they last, and what they do. Declarative memory helps us consciously recall facts and experiences, while non-declarative memory governs our habits and automatic behaviors. And sensory memory serves as the entry point for all incoming information. Altogether, these systems form a comprehensive and adaptable network that allows us to perceive, learn, and respond effectively to our environment. Now, let's explore declarative, or explicit, memory in more detail. This type of memory involves conscious, intentional effort to recall information. It's the kind of memory where you can consciously remember facts, experiences, or details, and then express them verbally. So, when you try to recall what you had for breakfast or the name of a childhood friend, you're engaging your declarative memory. It requires awareness, meaning you're aware that you're trying to remember something, and effort, because it doesn't happen automatically. This kind of memory is essential for reasoning, problem-solving, and reflective thinking. It forms the foundation of formal education and helps us develop cognitively. Essentially, declarative memory allows us to analyze the past, plan for the future, and make informed decisions based on what we've learned. Now, let's look at some of its key characteristics. First, conscious recall. That's the deliberate retrieval of information, not something that happens automatically. Second, verbal representation. This memory can be described using words or symbols, making it accessible for communication. Third, it's flexible and reconstructive. Memories can be modified or reorganized as we learn new information. Another important point is that declarative memory heavily depends on a part of our brain called the hippocampus. This region plays a crucial role in storing and retrieving these memories. However, it's also important to recognize that declarative memory can be affected by aging or brain injury, often declining more quickly than non-declarative memory, which includes skills and habits. So, understanding these points helps us see how vital declarative memory is for our daily functioning and lifelong learning, and also why it can be vulnerable under certain conditions. Let's take a closer look at the subtypes of declarative memory. First, we have semantic memory, which is essentially our memory of facts and knowledge. This includes general facts, meanings, and concepts about the world that aren't tied to any personal experience. For example, knowing that New Delhi is the capital of India, or that water freezes at 0 degrees C are instances of semantic memory. It's organized hierarchically, which helps us store and retrieve information efficiently. This type of memory forms the foundation for language understanding, categorization, and reasoning. Interestingly, semantic memory develops gradually over time through our experiences, education, and exposure to different cultures. Moving on to episodic memory, this refers to our memory of personal experiences. It involves specific events, situations, or episodes from our lives, often linked with a particular time and place. Think about recalling your first day at school, a recent trip, or a conversation with a friend. That's episodic memory in action. It gives us a sense of who we are and helps maintain our personal identity over time. Emotional content plays a significant role here. Experiences connected with strong feelings like joy, fear, or sadness tend to be remembered more vividly. Additionally, episodic and semantic memories are closely connected. Our personal experiences add meaning to our knowledge, and our knowledge helps us interpret our experiences, creating a rich, interconnected memory system. Now let's delve into declarative, or explicit, memory and explore what makes it so essential. Declarative memory is all about the facts and experiences we can consciously recall. It forms the basis of our reasoning, planning, and problem-solving abilities. Specifically, it includes semantic memory, which is our knowledge of facts, like knowing that Paris is the capital of France. Then there's episodic memory, which involves our personal experiences, such as recalling your last birthday celebration. Additionally, within declarative memory, we have working memory, a short-term, active processing system. Think of working memory as the mental workspace where we hold and manipulate information momentarily, like keeping a phone number in mind just long enough to dial or solving a math problem mentally. According to Baddeley's model from 1974, working memory is made up of several components. The central executive acts as the control tower, directing attention and coordinating mental operations. The phonological loop handles verbal and auditory information, like repeating a phone number in your head. The visuospatial sketchpad manages visual and spatial data, helping us navigate or visualize objects. Lastly, the episodic buffer integrates information from these sources into a coherent sequence, helping us form a bigger picture. Working memory plays a crucial role in language comprehension, decision-making, reasoning, and problem-solving, making it a vital part of our cognitive toolkit. To sum up, declarative memory enables us to consciously recall facts and past experiences. It's fundamental for reasoning and learning, and it comprises semantic memory, episodic memory, and working memory. Together, these components serve as the foundation of human intelligence, education, and our sense of identity. They allow us to learn from the past and adapt to new challenges, shaping who we are and how we grow. Now, let's take a closer look at non-declarative, or implicit, memory and sensory memory. While declarative memory involves conscious recall and verbal expression, implicit memory works unconsciously, influencing our behavior without us even realizing it. Similarly, sensory memory acts as the very first stage of processing information. It captures brief sensory impressions before they fade away or are transferred to higher-level systems for further processing. Together, these systems help us learn and perform tasks automatically and efficiently, often without us needing to think about it consciously. Moving on to non-declarative, or implicit memory. This refers to unconscious, automatic, and unintentional learning that influences how we think and act. It allows us to perform learned behaviors and responses without actively recalling each step. For example, riding a bicycle, typing on a keyboard, or brushing our teeth. We do these smoothly without consciously thinking about every movement. Unlike declarative memory, implicit memory tends to be very stable, procedural, and resistant to forgetting. So, in essence, these memory systems work behind the scenes, supporting our everyday functioning in a seamless way. Now, let's delve into the fascinating world of non-declarative, or implicit, memory, and how it influences our daily lives. First, we have procedural memory, which is our memory for skills and habits. This type of memory stores motor and cognitive skills that we've acquired through repeated practice. It enables us to perform actions automatically, without consciously thinking about each step. For example, when you're driving a car, tying your shoelaces, or playing a musical instrument, these are all thanks to procedural memory. This kind of memory is supported by brain regions like the cerebellum and basal ganglia. What's really interesting is that once these skills are learned, procedural memory tends to be long-lasting and is less vulnerable to brain injury or aging, which shows how resilient these skills can be. Next, let's talk about priming, which involves the influence of prior exposure on our responses. Priming occurs when being exposed to a stimulus previously affects how we respond to a related stimulus later on, often without us even realizing it. For instance, if you've just read the word doctor, you might recognize the word nurse faster because your mind has made an association. Priming helps us recognize things more quickly, make decisions faster, and even boosts our creativity by activating mental associations that we've stored subconsciously. Finally, there's conditioning, which is all about learned associations. This form of memory is based on classical and operant conditioning, where responses are learned through repeated pairing of stimuli. For example, if someone has a painful experience at a hospital, they might start feeling anxious whenever they visit one. This is an emotional and physiological reaction rooted in conditioned memory. These associations can strongly influence our reactions and behaviors without us even realizing it, highlighting how powerful implicit memory can be in shaping our responses to the world around us. Let's talk about sensory memory, which is often called the gateway to perception. Sensory memory is the very first stage of memory, and its main role is to briefly hold raw sensory information that we receive through our senses. Think of it as a kind of buffer system that captures all the sensory data around us, but only for a very short time. This brief storage allows our brains to decide what's important enough to pay attention to and process further. One of the key functions of sensory memory is to prevent sensory overload. Our senses are constantly bombarding us with a huge amount of information, but sensory memory filters this out so our brain isn't overwhelmed. It also helps maintain continuity in our perception. For example, even if something is changing rapidly, like a moving car or flickering lights, sensory memory helps us interpret these stimuli as part of a coherent experience. Importantly, sensory memory operates automatically and without us having to consciously think about it. It's a built-in mechanism that works seamlessly in the background, supporting how we perceive and make sense of the world around us. Now, let's explore the types of sensory memory, which are fascinating because they allow us to briefly hold onto sensory information. First, we have iconic memory, which is a type of visual memory. It temporarily stores visual information for about half a second. This quick storage helps us perceive smooth motion in movies or animations, even though each frame is static. Research by George Sperling in 1960 demonstrated that people can briefly retain a detailed visual image before it fades away, which highlights just how rapid and efficient this process is. Next, there's echoic memory, which is our auditory counterpart. It stores sound-based information for about 2 to 4 seconds. Imagine hearing someone say a few words and being able to repeat them even after you've momentarily lost focus. That's echoic memory at work. This type of memory is critical for understanding language, as it helps us process and sequence sounds in speech. Finally, we have haptic memory, which involves the brief retention of touch sensations. This includes textures, pressure, or temperature. For example, if you feel the texture of a fabric and then recognize it a moment later, that's haptic memory. It plays an important role in motor coordination and sensory integration, helping us interpret tactile information quickly and accurately. Together, these sensory memory types form the foundation for how we initially perceive and process the world around us, enabling us to make sense of our environment in real time. Today, we're going to explore some of the key models of memory that help us understand how our minds work. Over the years, psychologists have come up with different ways to explain how information is processed, stored, and retrieved. These models give us a structured way to see why we remember certain things and forget others. The 3 most influential models are the traditional or stage model, developed by Atkinson and Shiffrin in 1968, the levels of processing model by Craik and Lockhart from 1972, and the working memory model created by Baddeley and Hitch in 1974. Each of these models highlights a different aspect of memory. The traditional model focuses on the structure, how memory is organized into different stages. The levels of processing model emphasizes the depth of processing, how deeply we encode information affects how well we remember it. And the working memory model looks at active, ongoing processing, how we manipulate and use information in real time. By looking at these models together, we get a more comprehensive picture of how memory functions, which ties directly into understanding our overall cognitive processes and why memory can sometimes be so complex. Let's take a closer look at the traditional model of memory, developed by Atkinson and Shiffrin in 1968. This model is also known as the multi-store or stage model, and it's one of the earliest and most influential ways we understand how memory works. The key idea here is that memory consists of 3 separate stores: sensory memory, short-term memory, and long-term memory. Information flows through these stores in a specific order, one after the other. Starting with sensory memory, this is where raw sensory input is briefly held, less than a second. If we pay attention to this input, it moves into short-term memory. If we don't, it quickly fades away. Short-term memory, or STM, temporarily stores information for about 20 to 30 seconds. It has a limited capacity, roughly 7 plus or minus 2 items at a time. Rehearsal, which is mentally repeating the information, helps us keep it longer. Long-term memory, or LTM, is where information is stored permanently. It has nearly unlimited capacity. When we need to retrieve something, it's brought back from LTM into our conscious awareness, which is often associated with SDM. Let's quickly look at the mechanisms involved. Attention is crucial. It transfers data from sensory input to SDM. Rehearsal and encoding then help move information from SDM into LTM for long-term storage. And when we need to recall information, retrieval mechanisms access the data stored in LTM. Now, this model highlights the structured, step-by-step nature of memory. It clearly distinguishes between short-term and long-term retention. However, it's important to note that some critics argue it can be a bit too rigid and linear. It doesn't fully account for the roles of meaning, understanding, or feedback in the memory process. Overall, this model provides a useful framework, but like all models, it has its limitations when it comes to explaining the complexity of human memory. Now, let's take a closer look at the levels of processing model, which was proposed by Craik and Lockhart in 1972. This model marked a shift in how we think about memory. Instead of focusing solely on where memory is stored, it emphasizes how information is processed. The key idea here is that the depth, or level, of processing directly influences how well we remember something. Basically, the deeper the processing, the stronger the memory. Let's break down the different levels. First, we have shallow processing. This involves analyzing the structure or sound of the information, like noticing the font color or whether a word rhymes, but not really paying attention to its meaning. Because of this, memories formed at this level tend to be weak and short-lived. Next is intermediate processing, which is a bit deeper. It involves recognizing patterns and labeling them, such as categorizing a word as a noun or identifying an object as an animal. This level helps create a more meaningful connection, but isn't as deep as what comes next. Finally, we have deep processing. This focuses on understanding the meaning, context, and making associations. For example, connecting new concepts to what you already know or to your personal experiences. This level produces durable memories that are easier to retrieve later. The implications of this model are quite important. It encourages us to engage in meaningful learning rather than just rote memorization. It also explains why semantic encoding, understanding what something means, is more effective than surface-level rehearsal, like just repeating information over and over. While it may lack structural clarity, this model adds a valuable perspective on the quality of encoding and how that affects our ability to remember. So, in essence, how deeply we process information plays a crucial role in how well we retain it. Let's take a closer look at the working memory model proposed by Baddeley and Hitch in 1974. This model expands on the idea of short-term memory by describing it as an active, multi-component system. It doesn't just store information passively. Instead, it manipulates and integrates information to help us reason and understand what we're doing. The key idea here is that memory is dynamic. It works actively to process information for ongoing tasks like learning, reading, or problem-solving. Now, let's break down the main components of this model. First, we have the central executive. Think of this as the control center. It directs our attention, manages our cognitive resources, and coordinates the other subsystems. It's responsible for decision-making and switching focus between different tasks. Next, there's the phonological loop. This part handles verbal and auditory information. It's made up of two parts: a phonological store, which temporarily holds verbal sounds, and an articulatory rehearsal system, which subvocally repeats information to keep it active. For example, mentally repeating a phone number relies on this system. Then we have the visuospatial sketchpad. This component processes visual and spatial information, things like shapes, colors, and locations. Imagine visualizing a route on a map or picturing an object in your mind. That's what this part does. Finally, in 2000, the episodic buffer was added to the model. This component integrates information from various sources, visual, verbal, and long-term memory, into a single, coherent episode. For instance, when you remember a scene that combines sounds, images, and emotional tones, you're experiencing the episodic buffer at work. Overall, this model highlights how our working memory isn't just about holding information temporarily. It's about actively working with that information to support complex cognitive activities. Let's talk about forgetting, its nature, theories, and causes. Forgetting, simply put, is the inability to recall information that we have previously learned or stored. But it's important to remember, it doesn't mean that the information is completely gone. Sometimes, it's just inaccessible or temporarily blocked from our retrieval. Now, forgetting is actually a natural and adaptive process. It helps us filter out irrelevant or outdated information, so our minds can focus on what truly matters at the moment. Think of it as a kind of mental housekeeping. That said, too much or premature forgetting can cause problems. It can interfere with our learning, our performance, and even our daily functioning. Moving on to the nature and characteristics of forgetting, this process doesn't happen all at once. It occurs gradually and can vary from person to person, depending on the type of content or the conditions under which we learn. Forgetting can be partial, meaning we lose some details, or complete, where the entire memory is gone. It can also be temporary or permanent, depending on how strong the original memory traces were. Some common features include the loss of accessibility, where the information still exists, but we just can't access it at the moment. Then there's decay, where neural connections weaken over time if they're not reinforced. Interference is another factor, where old and new memories compete with each other, making recall more difficult. And finally, retrieval failure, which happens when the right cues or context are missing, preventing us from bringing the memory to mind. All these aspects help us understand why forgetting happens and how it fits into the broader picture of memory and cognition. Let's talk about forgetting, its nature, the theories behind it, and what causes it. Hermann Ebbinghaus, back in 1885, was a pioneer in studying memory systematically through experiments. He was the first to do so in a scientific way. He used nonsense syllables like BAF, ZOL, and KEP to test how we forget. These are meaningless combinations that help isolate memory processes without interference from meaning or prior knowledge. Ebbinghaus's experiments led to the discovery of what we now call the forgetting curve. This curve shows that forgetting happens most rapidly right after we learn something. So, the initial drop in memory retention is steep. But interestingly, after that initial period, the rate of forgetting slows down. What we manage to retain after a few days tends to stay quite stable over time. Another important concept he demonstrated is the savings effect. This means that if you forget something and then try to relearn it, it takes less time than when you first learned it. This indicates that some trace of the information still remains in our memory, even if we can't access it consciously at the moment. So, in essence, Ebbinghaus's work helps us understand that forgetting isn't just a sudden loss. It's a process, with rapid initial decline followed by stabilization, and that traces of information can persist beyond our conscious awareness. This all ties into the bigger picture of how our memory functions and why we forget. Let's explore the theories behind forgetting. First, we have the trace decay theory, proposed by Thorndike in 1914 and others. This theory suggests that our memories depend on physical traces in the brain called engrams. Over time, if these traces aren't reactivated or rehearsed, they tend to fade or decay. Essentially, this is the idea of use it or lose it. For example, if you haven't practiced a foreign language, you might forget it over time. However, a limitation of this theory is that it doesn't fully explain why sometimes forgotten information suddenly comes back. a phenomenon known as spontaneous recovery. Next, we have the interference theory, proposed by Magioch and MacDonald in 1931. This theory argues that forgetting often happens because similar memories interfere with each other. There are two main types of interference we should consider. Proactive interference occurs when old information gets in the way of learning or recalling new information. For instance, if you keep remembering your old phone number when trying to learn your new one. On the other hand, retroactive interference happens when new information disrupts the recall of previously learned material. An example would be forgetting your old password after learning a new one. Interference tends to be stronger when the materials are similar or learned close together in time. This highlights how important spacing and making information distinctive are for effective learning. Overall, these theories help us understand why forgetting happens and how different factors can influence it. Let's talk about forgetting, specifically focusing on the nature, theories, and causes behind it. One important theory is the cue-dependent or retrieval failure theory, proposed by Tulving in 1974. This theory suggests that sometimes we forget because the right retrieval cues are missing or insufficient. In other words, the information is actually stored in our memory, but we can't access it without the proper context or stimulus. For example, you might forget someone's name until you see their face again. That visual cue helps trigger the memory. Now, an important concept related to this is the encoding specificity principle. This principle states that memory is most effectively recalled when the context during retrieval matches the context during encoding. So, if you're studying in the same environment where you'll take your exam, you're more likely to remember what you've learned. This highlights how environment and context play a crucial role in memory retrieval. Moving on to motivated forgetting, which is explained by Freud's repression theory. Freud believed that some memories are unconsciously blocked because they cause anxiety, guilt, or distress. In this case, forgetting isn't accidental, it's a defensive mechanism. The mind represses painful or traumatic memories to protect us from psychological harm. For instance, someone might forget traumatic experiences from childhood as a way of shielding themselves from emotional pain. Interestingly, repressed memories can sometimes resurface later, especially during therapy or when triggered by emotional cues. So both these theories help us understand different reasons why forgetting happens, whether it's due to missing cues or deliberate repression, and they remind us how complex and adaptive our memory system truly is. Let's explore the factors that influence forgetting. First, time lapse plays a significant role. The longer the interval without rehearsal, the more we tend to forget. That's why regular review is so important. Next, the method of learning matters. Meaningful learning, where we understand and connect ideas, tends to stick longer than rote memorization. Overlearning or practicing beyond initial mastery also helps reduce forgetting by reinforcing the memory trace. Proper sleep and rest are crucial too, as they help consolidate what we've learned and prevent forgetting. Motivation and emotional involvement are key as well. When we're interested or emotionally engaged, retention improves. On the other hand, interference, when similar information is learned close together, can cause confusion and hinder recall. Now, if we look at the bigger picture, forgetting is a natural and complex process influenced by multiple factors including time, interference, cues, and emotional states. Several theories like trace decay, interference, cue-dependent, and motivated forgetting help explain why forgetting happens in different ways. For example, Ebbinghaus's research showed that forgetting happens rapidly at first, but then stabilizes over time. Understanding these mechanisms allows us to adopt strategies such as rehearsal, spaced practice, and learning in different contexts. These approaches can significantly reduce forgetting and help us retain information more effectively. Today, we're going to explore some effective strategies for enhancing our memory, focusing on mnemonics, imagery, and organization. As you know, memory can be strengthened through deliberate practice, good organization, and mental strategies that improve how we encode, store, and retrieve information. Psychologists have developed various techniques to help us recall better and make learning more meaningful. These strategies often rely on principles like association, visualization, and structure, which help information move smoothly from our short-term to long-term memory. Let's start with mnemonics, often called the art of memory aids. So, what exactly are mnemonics? They are techniques designed to make memory easier by organizing information in a way that's easier to recall later. Essentially, they work by creating connections between new information and what we already know. This linkage makes recall faster, more accurate, and generally more efficient. So, when you use a mnemonic, you're building a mental bridge that helps you retrieve information more effortlessly. This is a powerful tool, especially when trying to remember complex data or sequences. By understanding and applying these techniques, we can significantly improve our memory performance in everyday learning and beyond. Now, let's explore some key mnemonic methods that can really boost our memory. First up is the method of loci, also known as the location technique. This method actually dates back to ancient Greece, and it involves associating the items we want to remember with specific locations in a familiar environment. For example, if you're trying to memorize a shopping list, you might imagine placing the milk in your kitchen, the apples on your dining table, and the rice in your pantry. Visualizing these items in familiar spots helps you recall them later. This technique works especially well for ordered or sequential information, like speeches or lists. Next, we have the keyword method. This is particularly useful when learning foreign languages or abstract concepts. The idea is to connect a new word with a familiar word that sounds similar, the keyword, and then create a mental image that links the two. For instance, the Spanish word pato, which means duck, can be remembered by picturing a pot with a duck inside. Combining phonetic association with visual imagery makes it easier to remember and retain new words over the long term. Both of these methods leverage our brain's natural strengths, visualization and association, to enhance memory. When we understand and use these strategies, we can improve our ability to recall information more effectively, which ties back to our overall goal of mastering memory techniques. Let's talk about some key mnemonic methods that can really help enhance our memory. First, there's the peg word system. This involves linking each item we want to remember with a pre-memorized list of peg words that rhyme with numbers. For example, 1 is bun, 2 is shoe, 3 is tree. So if I want to remember a pen, I might imagine a bun holding a pen, kind of like attaching the item to a visual cue. This method is especially effective for ordered recall, like remembering sequences or numbers. Next, we have acronyms and acrostics. An acronym is when we take the first letters of a set of words and form a new, meaningful word. A classic example is VIBGYOR, which helps us remember the colors of the rainbow: violet, indigo, blue, green, yellow, orange, red. Acrostics are similar but involve creating a sentence where each word's first letter cues a piece of information. For instance, "Every good boy deserves fruit" is a handy way to recall the notes EGBDF on the musical staff. Both of these techniques simplify complex information into easy-to-recall verbal patterns, making learning and recall much more manageable. Overall, these mnemonic strategies are powerful tools that make it easier to organize and retrieve information, fitting perfectly into our broader goal of improving memory through imagery and organization. Let's talk about imagery as a powerful learning strategy. Imagery involves creating mental pictures or visual representations of the information we're trying to remember. This makes the information more concrete and easier to recall. When we use imagery, we're engaging both our verbal and visual memory systems, a process called dual coding, which actually helps strengthen the neural connections related to that memory. For example, if I want to remember the words apple, balloon, cat, I might imagine an apple tied to a colorful balloon, with a playful cat jumping nearby. This vivid mental image helps make the list more memorable. Imagery is especially useful when trying to recall lists, sequences, or concepts, because visualizing them vividly makes them stick. It's also great for understanding complex ideas in science, language, or history, especially those that are abstract. By turning them into visual images, we make them more accessible. The key to effective imagery is to make the pictures distinct, exaggerated, and emotionally charged. When the images are unique and emotionally engaging, they're much easier to remember. So, in essence, using mental imagery taps into our natural ability to visualize, making learning more engaging and memorable. Let's talk about some key strategies for enhancing memory through organization, specifically focusing on structuring information to make it easier to remember. Organization involves arranging information into logical, meaningful, or hierarchical structures. This helps our brain encode and retrieve data more efficiently. Essentially, it transforms scattered bits of information into structured patterns that are much easier for us to navigate and recall. Now, one of the main techniques is chunking. This means breaking down large pieces of information into smaller, manageable units or chunks. For example, when trying to remember a 10-digit phone number, we naturally split it into 3 groups like 982, 104, 3759. This method boosts our working memory efficiency because smaller chunks are easier to hold and process. Another important technique is categorization. Here, we group related concepts under common themes or categories. For instance, if we think of tiger, lion, leopard, we can group them together under wild animals. This promotes meaningful encoding and makes retrieval much easier because related items are stored together. Then there's hierarchical structuring. This involves organizing ideas from general to specific, often using outlines or concept maps. For example, starting with animals, then narrowing down to mammals, then to carnivores, and finally to tigers. This creates a clear, logical pathway that helps us remember complex information more effectively. Lastly, there's the story method or narrative technique. This is about creating a short story that links all the items we want to remember. Imagine trying to remember pen, book, candle, and rose. Picture yourself writing in a book by candlelight next to a rose. This combines imagery and association, making it a creative and memorable way to recall multiple items. Overall, these organization techniques, chunking, categorization, hierarchical structuring, and storytelling, are powerful tools to improve our memory by making information more structured, meaningful, and easier to retrieve. Let's talk about some strategies for enhancing memory, focusing on mnemonics, imagery, and organization. These techniques help us remember information more effectively. First, let's look at rehearsal and repetition techniques. Maintenance rehearsal involves simply repeating information to keep it active in our short-term memory. For example, repeating a phone number until you dial it. While this method is simple, it's less effective for long-term retention because it doesn't involve deeper processing. On the other hand, elaborative rehearsal is much more powerful. It means understanding and connecting new information to what we already know. Imagine linking a new psychological term to a real-life situation you've experienced. This kind of deep processing helps strengthen our long-term memory. To sum up, how we encode, structure, and rehearse information plays a crucial role in memory. Techniques like mnemonics, imagery, and organization are especially helpful because they create meaningful connections. These methods not only improve our ability to retain information over time, but also enhance recall and understanding. Ultimately, effective memory isn't just about repetition. It's about actively engaging our minds and making creative associations. That's what truly makes learning stick. Let's explore some fascinating applications of memory, specifically autobiographical, false, and flashbulb memories. Memory isn't just about storing facts. It plays a crucial role in shaping our identity, emotions, and how we navigate daily life. When we study applied memory, we see how we remember our personal experiences, how we reconstruct events in our minds, and how emotional influences can make certain memories incredibly vivid. Autobiographical memory refers to the recollections of our own lives, our personal stories, milestones, and significant moments. These memories help define who we are. However, they are not always perfect. They can be influenced by our current feelings or beliefs. False memories are another intriguing aspect. These are memories of events that never actually happened, but our mind convinces us they did. This highlights that memory is powerful but also vulnerable to distortion. Then there are flashbulb memories, those incredibly vivid, detailed memories of emotionally charged events, like a significant world event or personal tragedy. These memories feel crystal clear, but interestingly, they are still subject to inaccuracies over time. All of these forms show us that memory is both a remarkable tool for preserving our life stories and a fragile one that can be influenced by emotion and perception. Understanding this dual nature helps us appreciate the complexity of how we remember and interpret our experiences. Autobiographical memory, at its core, is about the memories of our personal life experiences that shape the story of who we are. It's a blend of two types of memory: semantic, which includes factual knowledge, and episodic, which involves our personal events. These memories help answer the fundamental questions: who am I? And what have I experienced? Now let's talk about the functions of autobiographical memory. First, there's the self-definitional function. This is what helps us develop a continuous sense of identity and personal history. For example, remembering your first day at school, your friendships, or milestones in your career reinforces your self-concept and gives your life coherence. Next, there's the social function. Sharing memories with others allows us to build connections and empathy. Telling your life story to family or friends helps strengthen those bonds and creates understanding. Then we have the directive function. Past experiences serve as lessons for the future. They guide our decisions and behaviors, helping us navigate new situations based on what we've learned before. In terms of development, autobiographical memory starts forming in early childhood, but really matures as we gain self-awareness. Interestingly, most of us tend to recall experiences from adolescence and early adulthood most vividly. That's called the reminiscence bump. Also, emotionally charged or repeated events tend to be remembered with greater detail. For example, your college graduation, the emotions you felt, the people there, the environment, all of these details contribute to your personal narrative. So, autobiographical memory isn't just about recalling facts. It's about understanding who we are and how our past shapes our present and future. Now, let's talk about false memories, which are a fascinating aspect of how our memory works. A false memory is essentially a distorted or even completely fabricated recollection of an event that never actually happened, yet it feels very real to the person remembering it. This can happen when our brains reconstruct memories using imagination, suggestions from others, or incomplete information. So, what causes these false memories? One major cause is suggestion and misleading information. For example, leading questions or repeatedly suggesting details can implant false memories. A classic example is eyewitnesses misremembering details after hearing others' accounts. Another cause is source confusion. This is when we have difficulty distinguishing between what we actually experienced and what we merely imagined or heard from someone else. Then there's schema-driven reconstruction. Our brain uses mental frameworks, called schemas, to fill in gaps in our memory. Sometimes, these schemas add details that seem plausible but are actually incorrect. Emotional factors also play a role. Intense emotions or stress can distort our perception and influence our later recall of events. Understanding false memories is not just an academic exercise, it's highly significant psychologically and legally. Research by Elizabeth Loftus has shown that our memories are reconstructive, meaning we rebuild them rather than retrieve them like a perfect recording. Because of this, false memories can have serious implications, especially in court testimonies, psychotherapy, or media influence. It underscores the importance of critically evaluating the accuracy of our memories in real-world situations. For instance, someone might remember being lost in a mall as a child after hearing that story repeatedly, even though it never actually happened. This illustrates how easily false memories can be formed and how powerful suggestion and emotion can be in shaping our recollections. Today, let's explore the fascinating world of flashbulb memories, a type of autobiographical memory that stands out due to its vividness and emotional intensity. A A flashbulb memory is essentially a highly detailed and vivid recollection of an emotionally significant or shocking event. Think of it as a mental snapshot, like a photograph, that captures exactly where you were, what you were doing, and how you felt at that moment. These memories tend to form during moments of surprise, fear, or excitement. For example, you might remember exactly where you were when you heard about a major event like 9/11, a natural disaster, or a personal milestone such as a wedding or the birth of a child. What's really interesting is that we often recall these memories with a lot of confidence and emotional clarity, even years later. However, research shows that despite this confidence, these memories are not always entirely accurate. Our emotional intensity can sometimes distort the details. So, what's behind the formation of flashbulb memories? One key factor is emotional arousal. When we experience strong emotions, our amygdala gets activated, which helps enhance the consolidation of those memories. Rehearsal also plays a role. We tend to think about, talk about, and retell these events repeatedly, which reinforces the memory and makes it more vivid in our minds. Additionally, social sharing contributes to this process. When we discuss these events with others, it not only boosts our confidence in the memory, but can also affect its accuracy, sometimes making it more vivid, sometimes distorting details. In summary, flashbulb memories are powerful because they're tied to our emotional experiences and are reinforced through repetition and social interaction. But it's important to remember that even our most vivid memories can be imperfect or incomplete. Let's talk about the applications of memory, specifically focusing on autobiographical, false, and flashbulb memories. These are all fascinating because they show us how complex and reconstructive our memory really is. Starting with autobiographical memories, these are the memories we have about our personal life events. They tend to be generally accurate, but not perfectly so. Usually, there's a moderate level of emotional involvement, which can influence how vividly we remember these moments. For example, you might remember a childhood trip with quite a bit of detail, but some parts may be fuzzy or slightly altered over time. Next, false memories are quite intriguing. These are memories that are distorted or even entirely imagined. They're often inaccurate, and the level of emotional involvement can vary greatly. Sometimes, people genuinely believe they remember something that never actually happened, like misremembering a conversation or an event. These false memories highlight how our minds can fill in gaps or even create details that feel real. Then we have flashbulb memories, which are associated with vivid, emotionally charged events. We often have very high confidence in these memories, but that doesn't always mean they are accurate. For instance, many people vividly recall where they were when they heard shocking news. These memories tend to feel incredibly detailed and emotionally intense, which is why they're called flashbulb memories. Now all three types of memories, autobiographical, false, and flashbulb, are interconnected. They demonstrate that memory isn't a perfect, literal recording of events. Instead, it's reconstructive, meaning our brains piece together memories from various fragments. Emotion, attention, and social context all play a role in shaping what we remember and how we remember it. So, understanding these different types of memories helps us see how our minds can be both reliable and fallible at the same time, influencing how we understand ourselves and our experiences within the broader theme of memory's complex nature. Let's take a moment to review the key points from this unit on memory. We started by understanding that memory is one of the most fundamental cognitive processes that allows us to encode, store, retain, and retrieve information. It's essential for learning, reasoning, adapting, and shaping our sense of identity. Essentially, our memories connect our past experiences with our present actions, influencing how we think, feel, and behave. We then explored the nature and process of memory, which functions through three main stages. First, encoding. This is when we transform sensory input into a form that our brain can store. Think of it as the initial registration of information. Next is storage, where we retain this encoded information over time, kind of like saving files on a computer. And finally, retrieval, the process of accessing that stored information whenever we need it. it's important to remember that memory isn't just a passive recording device. It's active and reconstructive. This means our brain organizes, interprets, and sometimes even alters our memories, making the process dynamic. Biological structures such as the hippocampus, amygdala, and cortex play crucial roles in memory formation and recall, highlighting how closely memory is linked to our brain's anatomy. Overall, understanding these processes helps us appreciate how complex and vital our memory system truly is, and how it shapes our everyday experiences. Let's take a moment to review the key points about the different types of memory we've covered. First, we have declarative or explicit memory. This is the conscious recall of facts and experiences. It's what we use when we're remembering birthdays, historical facts, or solving problems. Think of it as the kind of memory you actively bring to mind. Then there's non-declarative or implicit memory. This is more about unconscious memory, habits, skills, and associations that we perform automatically. For example, riding a bicycle, typing on a keyboard, or conditioned responses all fall into this category. We also have sensory memory, which is a very brief storage of sensory input. It acts as a gateway to our attention, like when you catch a flash of light or a sudden sound, and then it quickly fades away. What's important to understand is that these types of memory don't operate in isolation. They interact continuously, forming a dynamic system that underpins how we learn, develop habits, and maintain awareness of our environment. Recognizing these distinctions helps us appreciate the complexity and efficiency of our memory system as a whole. Now, let's summarize the key takeaways from our discussion on memory. First, we looked at the traditional model by Atkinson and Shiffrin, which suggests that information moves in a sequence from sensory memory to short-term memory, and then to long-term memory. This model highlights the importance of rehearsal and attention in transferring information into storage. Next, we explored the levels of processing approach by Craik and Lockhart, which emphasizes that the depth of processing, whether shallow or meaningful, affects how well we remember information. Essentially, deeper, more meaningful processing leads to better retention. We also examined the concept of working memory, developed by Baddeley and Hitch. This model describes short-term memory as an active system composed of different components: the central executive, phonological loop, visuospatial sketchpad, and episodic buffer that work together to support reasoning and understanding. Moving on to forgetting, it's important to recognize that forgetting is simply the inability to recall stored information, and it can be caused by various internal and external factors. One key theory is trace decay, which suggests that memories fade over time if they are not revisited. Interference theory explains that similar information can disrupt our recall, either proactive interference, where old information interferes with new, or retroactive interference, where new information disrupts old memories. Another important concept is cue-dependent forgetting, which occurs when we lack the proper cues to trigger recall. Freud proposed motivated forgetting, where painful or unpleasant memories are repressed unconsciously to protect ourselves emotionally. We also discussed Ebbinghaus's forgetting curve, which shows that forgetting happens rapidly right after learning, but then stabilizes over time. Finally, it's worth noting that forgetting isn't always a negative thing. It's actually functional and adaptive. It helps us filter out unnecessary details and prevents cognitive overload, enabling us to focus on what's truly important. So, in essence, understanding these models and theories gives us a clearer picture of how memory works, why we forget, and how this process is vital for our mental efficiency. Let's wrap up with some key takeaways on strategies for enhancing our memory. First, mnemonics are powerful tools. Using imagery, associations, or acronyms can really improve recall. For example, techniques like the method of loci or the keyword method help us remember information more easily. Imagery involves forming vivid mental pictures, which makes encoding much more effective. Organization is also crucial. Structuring information logically through chunking, categorization, or even storytelling helps our brain process and store data better. Rehearsal, whether through maintenance or elaborative repetition, strengthens our memory traces over time. Another important concept is meaningful learning. Connecting new information with what we already know creates deeper understanding. Lastly, spacing our practice sessions and ensuring proper rest through sleep are essential, as distributed practice and quality sleep help consolidate memories more effectively. Now, shifting gears to how we use memory in real life, autobiographical memory plays a big role. It helps us build our personal identity and maintain a sense of life continuity by recalling our experiences. However, we also need to be aware of false memories, which show how our memories are reconstructive and can be distorted by suggestion or emotion. This highlights that memory isn't always perfectly accurate. Then there are flashbulb memories, those vivid, emotionally charged memories of significant events. They seem crystal clear, but they're not always completely accurate. These examples demonstrate that memory is influenced by attention, emotion, and context. Ultimately, our memories are a blend of accuracy and creative reconstruction, which is a fascinating aspect of how our minds work. Let's wrap up with some key takeaways about memory. First, memory is a dynamic and reconstructive process, meaning it's not just about storing information, but actively shaping and reshaping what we remember through encoding, storage, and retrieval. It operates through multiple systems, including declarative memory, which involves facts and events, non-declarative memory like skills and habits, and sensory memory that briefly holds sensory information. Several major models, such as those by Atkinson and Shiffrin, Craik and Lockhart, and Baddeley and Hitch, help us understand the structure of memory, how deeply we process information, and how active processing enhances our retention. When it comes to forgetting, factors like decay over time, interference from other memories, and lack of cues can all play a role. However, we can reduce forgetting through rehearsal techniques and by attaching meaning to the information we want to remember. Techniques like mnemonics, imagery, and organizing information can significantly boost our long-term retention and understanding. It's crucial to realize that memory doesn't just shape what we know, it influences our identity, how we learn, our emotions, and behaviors. Overall, memory serves as the foundation of our human experience. Now, here's the final insight. Memory isn't just a storage space for knowledge. It's also a creative system that constructs our perception of reality. When we understand how we remember and forget, we become better at learning, teaching, and living mindfully. Mastering our memory is really about mastering the art of learning, adapting, and developing self-awareness. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate your time and attention throughout this presentation. If you found the content helpful or inspiring, please don't forget to give us a thumbs up and hit the bell subscribe button so you never miss out on more amazing videos from Sapphire. Your support helps us continue creating valuable content for you. Once again, thank you, and we look forward to bringing you more insightful and engaging material in the future.